Hello and welcome to Hanratty on Karate. Today I've got a very good friend of mine with me and we're just going to chat a while. It's Edmond Otis, a world-famous karateka, also a clinical psychologist and former head of New Zealand's Napier University Sports Psychology Group. Oh, Ed, how are you doing?
Hey, John. I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. I'm just going to bring your sound up. You're a little faint there. So I thought we'd get together and chat today about, different things. Are we still good? Can you still hear me?
Yep, you sound great.
Okay, because it looks like my picture's frozen here, but what the hell? We're cold. We're in Canada. Everything's frozen.
Yeah, and absolutely. And when I close my eyes and I think of you, you're a thing of beauty, so I'm good.
All right. So, Ed, you've had a pretty distinguished karate career. And usually when I'm doing interviews with people, I like to, get into how they started and all that. Now, I know you're living back in Florida from New Zealand,
Yep.
But you're originally from California, right?
I'm originally from California, and like probably you and a lot of our colleagues, when I think about when I started, I'm kind of stunned at how long it's been, but it keeps you going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in Southern California. I started in 1967, and I had a couple of advantages. Back in the day, nowadays, all kinds of dojos have kids in a dojo, which is fabulous, because karate is really great for kids. But at that time, at least in the U.S., and I imagine most places, I was the only kid I ever saw who did karate. And I started with about three of my friends. There was four of us, and they lasted for about 2 weeks. And I just thought it was great. They didn't like it that much. But it was a Shotokan club, and it was what we call like a satellite club. What we were really lucky is Los Angeles is where Nishiyama Sensei settled. Mm-hmm. So we had an amazingly high level of karate in the area. So it was in 67, and I kind of see myself as that third generation. But my seniors, who were significant, very strong at that time, included Frank Smith, James Yabe, James Fields, Ray Dalkey, who eventually became my full-time instructor, along with Frank Smith for a while. So there was a tremendously strong level of karate. And I was just kind of a pudgy kid. So I don't want to imply that I was extra good at the time. They were just nice to me, and they let me come out on the floor. But I think that gave me an advantage. So I got to train side by side with everybody. I felt comfortable, and people were really, really very nice to me. It was a great group.
Great. So were you still living in Santa Barbara at the time, or you'd moved to L.A.?
No, I was living in Santa Barbara from 67 all the way until I graduated from high school.
Oh, okay.
Right, so the karate was there. What we had dojos, it was at that time it was AAKF, JK dojos. So my branch instructor was named Lou McClintock. He was a really great guy, probably about Shodan level. But then about 2 years after I started, we had a really brilliant Sandan from Nishiyama's group come up to UCSB. So at that time, we were all hippies, and I used to hitchhike out, leave school early, tell the teacher I had a stomachache, and go out to the university, and I would train there 3 or 4 times a week.
Cool.
Which was fun because it was, a period of hippies and karate and revolution, so it was a fun time.
Right. So Nishiyama did all your Q gradings?
Nishiyama did my Q gradings, but also, I guess the year before I got there, Yaguchi Sensei was there as well. So it was an amazing dojo with a lot of depth.
Right.
And this was before he finally went off to Colorado and started that branch there.
Right.
So, every time we would go to LA, and this would be at least once a week, often twice. It was either Nishiyama training or Yaguchi Sensei training.
Right.
Some of the nights were more intense than others. The big thing in the area, that team at the time was the JK team of the United States.
Right.
We had all kinds of high-level JK instructors come out, which again, as a brown belt, about 14 years old, it was amazing getting to see, Ishii and Ueki and Tanaka and Tabata. All those guys came through because they all wanted to train with Nishiyama. So it was really extraordinary.
Yeah. So was that the dojo on Wilshire? I know I used to go down there a lot.
No, it was, I have it in my memory. Yep, it was 1440 West Olympic Avenue.
Okay.
Yeah, and then it moved. And I know that because, again, in the day, people were hitchhiking like crazy. So I had a backpack, I would hitchhike, and people were nice, never had a problem. And where are you going? Well, I'm going to 1440 West And I often got rides directly there if I could gather a ride.
Right.
And then somebody would often give me a ride home. So, yeah, but it was a fabulous dojo in the worst area in the world.
Yeah.
But nobody seemed to bother us, The dojo was, looking back on it, it wasn't fancy by any means, but it was extraordinary. Beautiful, intense karate at the time.
Yeah. So I guess downtown LA wasn't as bad then as it is now.
Well, parts were. I mean, parts are good, parts are bad. This area was mainly industrial. I mean, mainly business. So when we were there in the evening, the streets were mostly empty. So it was just kind of a rundown building that Nishiyama Sensei kept holding on to.
Yeah. Now, I remember the Wilshire Dojo. I trained there a lot. So I had a good time. And I say James Yabbie and Frank Smith, James Field, Greer Golden, all those guys. I came across them once or twice in the early times. Of course, I didn't get over to North America until 1980. But I immediately started going down to Nishiyama camps in La Jolla and stuff like that.
Yeah, those camps were amazing. And again, I was with the UCSB group, which was a university group. We had a strong group, and the camaraderie was great. It was really, really very fun. Yaguchi was fabulous, very nice to me. And I think, we always talk about, or often talk about, what are the things you get out of karate. And anybody listening to this appreciates that. But I think I was really, really fortunate in that at that time when I was 15, my father went to work one day and just had a heart attack and passed away. And so basically I was an only child by myself. And I never realized it until just a few years ago that the dojo took me in.
Right.
I never paid for training. I never paid for camp. I always had rides. It never occurred to me. But the dojo became an extended family for me.
No, they kind of adopted you.
Yeah, they did. And they were incredibly sweet. And as we know from karate dojos, I think it's interesting. Karate dojos are one of the environments where you have such a broad range of people doing the same thing with intensity at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, there are very few places where you have, steel workers and bikers and lawyers and doctors and teachers all doing the same thing and all welcoming each other. When I started, I always laugh, at that time in 67, there was me, which is a 12-year-old kid. And then it was Vietnam veterans, bikers, police, and that was about it.
Yeah. So I think Dolky came from a biker background, didn't he?
Yeah. And he was famous at the time, right? When I left, when I graduated high school, he invited me out and I went to Riverside. He was at the University of California, Riverside, had one of the first academic programs. And so he invited me out, and that's why I moved to Riverside. I became part of that program. And eventually I went on staff with that once I graduated.
Right. I know it was pretty amazing that he started a martial arts program in a university. I think he was probably the first guy to do that.
Yes, yeah. We had a club, but he was able to do something that's still unusual. He started it with academic credit. He was in the Department of Physical Education. And then from that, after he retired, we actually spread it out a little bit. I stayed there, and we actually linked up with Humanities and Asian Studies. And so we trained just as intensely, but we also got to do some academic focus on that. But it was a remarkable program at the time.
Yeah, I know. I tried to steal it from him for the University of Calgary, but they, of course, turned around and said, we don't have the funding for it. If you want to self-fund it, you can go ahead. But I didn't think I'd be able to fund the academic side of it as well.
Well, we were just fortunate. It takes, it's a combination of factors. We had the right people at the right time.
Right.
We saw the value. And again, we were considered faculty members, academic staff, lecturers.
Yeah.
So we were able to do that. I mean, and on campus was tremendously popular. If you figure at the time that university only had about 4,000 undergraduate students, we had about 400 martial arts students at the time.
That's pretty good, like 10% of the...
Yeah. Phenomenal. So that was an incredibly successful program, and it was really enjoyable to be part of.
Yeah. So apart from the university side of it, who in Nishiyama's dojo impressed you, and what was the personalities there?
It was a fabulous dojo. It was big time because Santa Barbara is a small town, so basically we were going to the city. We'd see a lot of people with Dalki Sensei, in addition to the university program, he also had a dojo in town.
Yeah.
So I was able to teach at both. And his co-instructor for 10 years, Frank Smith, I would see Frank Smith 2 or 3 times a week. And it's hard to describe the intensity and the technical brilliance of Frank Smith. Different generations, but I would put him in the same category as Frank Brennan as far as intensity.
Right.
We were on the floor. Tabata came out. Frank, how it is in the dojo, everybody's sparring, but we're all looking at them. Tabata attacked him. Frank took him to the floor. They stood up. It was just about to happen. And I thought it was so interesting. Nishiyama stopped it.
Yeah.
Come rotate. And Frank was many-time national champion, international champion.
Yeah.
And then he kind of got fed up with the politics of the situation.
Yeah.
And he kind of pulled back and just did his own training for a long time.
Yeah.
Like everybody's been around for a while. There's a lot of, I believe, unnecessary politics that's hard to separate yourself from.
Yeah, that's a shame. I remember conversations with Ray Dalkey, and he told me about the 65 visits of the JKA team, which would have been, Kanazawa, Anoida, Shirai, that first group, Oishi.
Yep.
And do you know what happened? Because you must have been in the dojo just after that.
Yeah, I was in the dojo just after that, but I heard they gave as good as they got. People were really, really surprised.
There was a little acrimony, wasn't there, with Frank Smith getting his jaw broke?
I believe that happened even earlier, and I've only heard secondhand from that.
Okay.
Yeah, but Shirai Nanoida came in the dojo, and at one point, Frank was going after him, and Frank says, what we talked about, he says, yeah, that's what changed his karate. Because he was pretty young at the time. He was only, I believe, a Shodan. Shirai was brilliant, was already a 4th or 5th Dan.
Right.
But Frank was the strongest, but he was kind of a big, rough kid at the time from what is described. Yeah. And he broke his jaw completely. Had to take him to the hospital. But talking to Frank, we never actually spoke about it too much, but everybody says that's the point where he changed entirely. He became intense with everybody.
Yeah. So you kind of made him better, or just a little bit more intense and determined.
Well, it made him better, but it was harder on everybody else. I just value the fact that I survived that. But I was really fortunate. As I was a junior, Frank, 5th Dan, I was probably just got my sandan. I was lucky I got my sandan pretty early, which was unusual at the time. But there would be times I would spar with Frank 3 times a week. Or he would spar with me.
Yeah.
Let me phrase it that way.
Yeah. So James Yabe trained pretty regular there as well, yeah?
Yeah, it was a real pool of talent, Southern California. James Yabe trained. We would see him frequently in LA. As you mentioned, Greer Golden, Greer and Dalki Sensei were really, really good friends.
And James Field?
And James Fields, of course. James a little bit younger, but incredible talent. So that group itself was phenomenal. And obviously, we know that when you're just on the floor with that level of intensity, it raises the level.
Yeah.
And for me to be around that, at 19, 20, 21, which was really extraordinary.
Yeah. Some of your best memories of that time, basically at Nishiyama's dojo or Dalki's?
Well, Nishiyama's dojo was always special. And when we were going there, it was before we politically broke up, I got to spar with an incredibly strong range of people, but I was really too young for them to do anything but mentor me. So it really felt, in a sense, it was exciting. I was very serious. But since I was so junior, but the only young one there, I sparred with a tremendous number of people, but was never at risk. As I got older, for myself personally, the training got more intense because, nobody wants to beat up a 17-year-old. The training got more intense. So the most intense karate I remember was at the Riverside Dojo.
Yeah.
Either with Frank Smith, or we would travel to other dojos, or people would come to see us. It really shifted, and for about 5 or 10 years, probably 10 years, that dojo became the epicenter of JK karate in California.
Yeah, I remember that dojo downtown Riverside. I spoke to Ray about it once. He said he bought the building off the city. It was an old substation. He bought the building off the city for about $1. And, well, he was a good businnerman.
It was brilliant. Yeah. And we went in, we redid the floors. We basically did the whole thing. I mean, I lived there between apartments.
Yeah.
Sometimes I figure out what kept me in karate so much. It was that the family and I resonated so much to it. But also, to be really, really honest, I was much cuter to girls with karate than without karate. So I think that helped because at the university, karate was the big thing on campus.
Yeah.
The university was fairly small, 4 campuses. And this social interaction, the combination of karate intensity plus the culture made it a very exciting and really enjoyable environment.
Did you manage to get any long-time stars from your program, or long-time people who carried on their karate career from the university?
Well, it depends how we consider long time. For example, during AAKF and ISKF, and especially with ISKF, our dojo, I'm still close friends with Jack Clark, who is a multi-time Pan American champion and national champion. I'm still good friends with others who probably trained 10 or 15 years, but most of them have left. Mm-hmm. But there are some good relationships. The clubs that came out of there, we had numerous. We're fortunate. We were multi-time national champion and at the same time national collegiate champion.
Yeah.
But I don't know very many people. There's Marty Callahan, who was my senior at Dalkey's dojo. He's now in Northern California.
Yeah.
Of my peer group, I think he's the only one. And I think, to be honest, part of that is the intensity just got to be too much in some ways. There were periods where the intensity was so much that it was very difficult to come to the dojo, which everybody has, but they weren't very successful in grooming a second level.
Right.
And you just have to look at results. I don't know if good or bad, but, there was a tremendous amount of intensity.
Yeah. Well, you see TV movies about all these competitions that were going on around California at the time, like in the Karate Kid and stuff like that. Did you ever enter any of the freestyle competitions, or did your group?
Well, Riverside, we put on one of the big tournaments that went on for like 30 years at the university. We'd attend. So there was not closed tournaments. There was JK tournaments or Japanese style karate tournaments. And by that, we were also competing against, Demura's group, Koyama's JK, but, the group out of Pasadena, Kubota Sensei,
right,
who had very similar style, his guys were tremendously strong.
Yeah.
And then there were tournaments we went to. Some years we just opened it up, and there was white geese and black geese and blue geese and purple geese. And
been there.
And you can laugh, but some of those guys were tough.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons they were so tough is they didn't have very good training, so only the tough in there survived.
Yeah.
So that was always interesting, and that kind of reinforced how I look at karate and how karate can be the most effective.
Right.
But yeah, there was a lot of that. It was fun. There were times where people were torn apart. Dragged off the floor, screaming and yelling. Yeah. Occasionally, the police had to come. Not very often. But it went nuts every now and then. That was exciting too. Nobody got seriously hurt.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when you say that they were tough because they didn't have good basic training, that's an interesting idea, a good concept. I've been in quite a few competitions and fights myself, and toughest fights, of course, not in the ring. So I was going to ask you, when you went in the Riverside tournament, I went in a few times. The last one I went in, the Masters, in, I think, 95. And I had, 12 fights in a row. Dalkey wouldn't give you a point if you paid him. And
especially if he liked you. It's even harder.
Yeah, you had to fight for it. And I managed to come second in kata and first in kumite. But I know they had a college competition there at the same time, because my group from Canada ended up fighting Chuck Colburn's group out of Arizona. And we did quite well there.
Yeah. Well, at that time, we had moved over to ISKF under Okazaki Sensei.
Yeah.
And their nationals was always, and at that time, there were several good collegiate programs throughout the country. So when we would go to their nationals, we would always compete. There was an ISKF national, and then there was an ISKF collegiate national.
Yeah.
So basically, it was 2 large tournaments back to back. I was fortunate. I managed to win. There's a couple of years where I actually managed to win both, but that was unusual. But yeah, there was always that. So we had 2 full tournaments going side by side. With the Riverside Championship and also some of the others, there would be college divisions.
Yeah.
So, for example, in team, we'd have team comité, and usually the senior or the non-collegiate team committee was 5 men. But then the collegiate competition was 3 men.
Yes.
So we'd field a team in each of those.
Right.
And again, the competition was very intense. You know, if you remember back in the day, there were no hand pads.
Yep.
There were very few disqualifications for cuts.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you scored what we thought of as traditional points. We had, you know, people coming in from overseas to compete with us. So there was a lot of really high-level intensity.
Yeah.
And also, to be honest, there was a lot of low-level intensity, which was often wilder. But it seemed the intensity was a major part of it.
Yeah. So you say Frank Smith won quite a number of national championships. Did you guys ever go over to Japan for the Shoto Cup or anything like that?
We didn't. My group didn't, because by then we had broken off with ISKF. But before that, the group that was going to Japan was my senior group. We would compete. But I was never either old enough or at that time good enough to get into the same ranks at all with Smith and Yabe and Fields and Dalkey, because they were all late 20s. I was 18. They were Sandons. But the intensity. So we competed with them. I just didn't do that until later on.
Right. Did anybody go to the? I don't know if you remember in '83. They had a World Cup in Egypt. Did anybody from your group go there?
By then, we had, again, there was a political mix-up.
Yeah.
And by then, things were kind of breaking down. I believe ISKF sent a group.
Right.
But I don't believe our group attended.
I think, Nishiyama's group went, I know.
Yes, Nishiyama's group, but by then we had separated from him. Again, the groups, for a variety of reasons, kept breaking down. It seems to me now, JKA, we'll talk about this later. I make two distinctions. There's the JKA, but then there's JKA Karate.
Right.
Like there's JKA Shotokan, which is a subpart, of, you can think of Shotokan broadly, but there's JKA Shotokan.
Right.
Now it seems, and I'm looking because we have a new group we've started. Now it seems there's a lot of opportunities for JK Karate practitioners to compete and go with each other regardless of the association they're with.
Right.
I wish that had happened earlier on.
Yeah, unfortunately, I understand exactly where you're coming from. We're kind of independent organization because of that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this one here. We'll probably put it out in a week or so. But thanks very much for chatting. I'm going to chat again to you, probably about your competition experiences. And then maybe in a later broadcast, we can get your philosophy on where it's going and what it's going right now. So thank you very much for this. All right. And we'll talk to you again and we'll put that one out. I'm sure everybody's going to be looking forward to it. Thank you very much, Ed. As usual, if anybody has any comments or questions, queries, whatever, get in touch and we'll be very grateful. Thank you.